Who is it?
My name is Aaron Wilson. I'm a reporter for the Joplin Tribune.
What do you want?
I want to talk to you about Mr. Klayman.
Why do you want to talk to me about him?
Well, I understand that you knew him better than anyone in Joplin, and I thought you might be a good person to talk to.
Go on.
The circumstances surrounding his death were so unusual, and it just seems like the police are very reluctant to give out any information to the press or even the general public.
Okay. The facts of the case as we know them at this point are this. We know that Mr. Klayman died in a compromising position. He died due to blunt trauma, more specifically blunt trauma to the head. We found a fork in the left eye, the right cheek, and the mouth. Now we feel from the evidence that we have surveyed over the scene that we found some videotapes that indicate to us that Mr. Klayman may have been involved in auto-erotic behavior. And we feel, going through the evidence, that he died due to accidental autoerotic suicide. Now, you, sir, yes,
Do you really expect us to believe that a gentleman who was an adult grade school instructor, who was very well liked by his students, would have this double life? Isn't it true that there was evidence that you have been sweeping under the rug that you are not letting out because you are not willing or not capable of handling this as the murder that it really was? It's too weird of a case, and as a little Joplin police officer, you don't have the guts to dive into this as a murder investigation. Excuse me, sir.
Let me interject here now. Small city Joplin policeman, that's not really the issue. What we're dealing with is the evidence that we have gone through at the scene of the incident. And what we have discovered are these tapes, again, as I said before, that indicate it was an autoerotic suicide accidental. No evidence whatsoever suggests that this was a murder of any kind. We have gone over the scene with our forensic specialists, and again, at this time, we were prepared basically to wrap the case up. Very simply, Mr. Klayman was just involved in these particular situations, as I mentioned, and it just appears that it was an accidental death due to this autoerotic behavior. There is no evidence, let me close that right now, all speculation. There's no evidence of any foul play.
Mr. Smithson!
Thank you.
Mr. Smithson!
No more questions. Thank you. That's it. The case is closed.
Why is that important to you?
Because I feel they're trying to hide something from us. Maybe they know something more and they don't want to let it out, or maybe they don't know anything and they're just afraid to pursue it.
And you are willing to pursue it?
Yes, I am.
What did you say your name was?
It's Aaron Wilson.
Well, I suppose you could come in for a few minutes.
How well did you know Mr. Klayman?
He and I had become good friends.
He and I
had become good friends. He and I had become good friends.
Had you known him long? Had you known him long? Okay. Had you known him long?
No, not terribly long.
How did the two of you meet?
Mr. Klayman moved to Joplin about 2 years ago. He lived in his apartment building for about
6 months before he moved out. So you first met him when he lived here?
Oh, yes. I met him in the laundry room. He was very friendly and nice. We had a lot in common. We became friends.
Were you ever anything more than just friends?
No.
No.
We were just friends.
As far as you know, was he involved romantically with anyone?
No.
No, but he was in love with someone.
Who was it with? Who was it? Who was it?
He was in
love with Miss Day.
He was in love with
Miss Day.
He was in love. He was in love with
Miss Day.
Miss Day? Miss Day?
He was in
love with Miss Day.
Miss Day? So why did Mr. Klayman move to Joplin in the first place?
He had been living in Cincinnati for a few years and had become quite involved in producing his own public access television show at the Intercommunity Cable Regulatory Commission. Apparently his program started getting a little bit too, shall we say, controversial for the good people of Cincinnati. Controversial? They told him he couldn't make his show anymore. He was devastated. He vowed to leave Cincinnati and never return again.
But why would he come to Joplin?
According to the place's rated almanac, Joplin had the most affordable housing among cities with significant populations. Mr. Klayman was really into turn-of-the-century summer backyard auction imagery. He was hopeful that Joplin would have a whole bunch of big old houses that were historic and yet affordable. He had a dream of buying one of these houses and fixing it up, and then having
auctions in his backyard.
Was his family from the Cincinnati area?
No. He just said that he had some family back here.
Did he move into the house on Schifferdecker Avenue right after leaving this apartment complex?
Yes.
That's correct.
Is that about the same time he opened up the adult grade school?
Mr. Wilson, would you care for some tea?
Oh, yes, thank you. That'd be wonderful.
I'm going to put myself in the button. Just being screaming.
So how did the idea for the adult grade school come about?
Well, you have to understand that Mr. Klayman had a
Different kind of temperament.
He was a very gentle man and extremely sensitive to human
Negativity.
He had a hard time fitting into mainstream jobs in reality. He had all kinds of ideas for potential careers and things he'd like to do
With his life.
Like what?
Well, for example, he felt that the time was right for the
Reintroduction of the
milkman.
He felt that people were yearning for
Reminders of the past and a more simple way
Way of life.
But he also felt that there was a utilitarian benefit to the milkman as well.
What do you mean?
Think of how many extra trips to the store or neighborhood mart you make every week just for milk.
That's true.
And think of how inconvenient it is to bring milk home for many people. If it's placed inside a paper bag, milk can begin to sweat and dampen the bag to the point where results like this are a very real possibility. And if you carry the milk separate from your
Groceries. That too can
present problems.
How so?
Do you have a dog?
Mr. Wilson?
Yes, I do. Oh, I think I see where you're going.
Perhaps
Then
then
you can appreciate the difficulty in juggling a bag full of groceries.
milk and a dog, especially if you live in an apartment and are trying to minimize the amount of trips you make
To your car.
So whatever happened to the milkman?
Mr. Klayman lacked the business savvy and
Acumen needed for such
enterprises to succeed. The milkman idea never came to fruition.
But if he didn't have a good business sense, how did the adult grade school ever get off the ground?
The adult grade school was
Not so much a business as it was an extension of his own reality.
So what was the purpose for an adult grade school?
It was an attempt to give adults
A reprieve from the harshness and difficulties of their lives. It was a place where they could be
themselves again and
hopefully recreate environments from their childhood landscapes, where it was
acceptable to look under
tables and in trumpet cases and wonder what it would be like to live in those worlds. It was a place where the hypnotic drones of refrigerators, fans, or slide projectors would not be ignored.
Okay guys, today we are going to look at slides of the Great Lakes and Lake Ontario, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, Superior, and Lake Huron. And we talked about the different sizes of these lakes, the borders, the states in which they're located in, and in some cases even on the Canadian border. But I wanted everybody to get a chance to see some of these things in case they're not, in case you haven't seen them before. The different bodies, the different choppiness of the water. So I think you guys are going to like this. But let's turn the lights off here, and we'll get all of this queued up. We turn that off. Get these lights off. Switch on flare. Okay. And let's have the first slide. I want everyone to just really tune into the sound of the slide projector. And eventually we can watch the slides. Just quiet. Just quiet. Go to sleep. When exactly did Mr. Klayman open up the school?
He started it at the end of last summer. He ran it right out of his own home.
Was it like regular school with everyday classes?
For Mr.
Mr. Klayman, yes, it was every day. But the students would come when they could, or when they needed to.
You were a student of his too, right?
Yes.
That's right.
How often did you attend?
Once a week,
Always.
sometimes more if I could.
What was a typical day like at the school? I mean, what did you guys even do? Mostly games and activities.
Other times he would just tell us funny stories or talk about things that
He thought we might like or we'd be interested in.
What kind of games would you play?
One game we played was called
Minnesota versus Wisconsin.
It was an opposite game, and what we would have to do was come up.
And really, this is going to be an opposite game. And how it works is we're going to come up with other opposites, kind of perfect pairs, but opposites, and plot them on whether they're more Minnesota or whether they're more Wisconsin. Because we think of Minnesota and Wisconsin as being opposites. And so to give you an example, let's start off with night and day. Which one do you think of more as being Minnesota and the other one being more Wisconsin? Okay, right. So Minnesota is definitely night and Wisconsin is day. Okay, so keeping that in mind, in fact, what I'll do is I'll put a little line underneath these so we can really keep them separated. So we'll just kind of throw out pairs and see which one we wind up getting with these appropriate states. So Pepsi and Coke. Okay? Pepsi is Minnesota and Coke is Wisconsin. Okay? How about salt and pepper? This is actually kind of a neat one because it's a very difficult one, but salt and pepper. Yeah, I think that's probably, I could go with that. On one hand, some of we think of Minnesota as being kind of a frozen Iceland, and salt, I think, kind of fits that imagery. At the same time, we've got the night precedent here, and a very difficult one. And I think let's go ahead and, well, yeah, certainly Pepsi and pepper. I think for now, let's put pepper on the side of Minnesota. We'll put a little asterisk on it, meaning that was kind of a difficult one for us to decide. And certainly I'll put the asterisk over here by salt as well. But pepper and salt, definitely one of the more fun ones. Fork and spoon. Fork and spoon. Yeah, and kind of ironic because fork is what you're going to eat with, and you don't really drink with a spoon, but certainly you can slurp, and yet I think fork definitely is a better fit for Minnesota. Kind of that sharp prong. Here we've got the motherly round hips, the spoon, and I think spoon definitely a better fit for Wisconsin.
What was the best story he ever told in class?
My favorite one was the story he told about his first flight to Salt Lake City. He said that he had dyed his earwax pink and was so happy because no one in the airport had any idea what he had done. And he was also afraid of choking on the airplane food.
And speaking of Salt Lake City, Mr. Klayman was fascinated by the Great Salt Lake,
And he would try to fit it into his lectures
whenever possible.
Well, one of the most interesting stories I ran across was up in the north part of the lake. There's an island called Gunnison Island. And there was a gentleman, and I just honestly, his name escapes me right now, but I'll find out for next time. And this was in the 1890s, and he did something that you would normally think of people doing in the 1960s, but this was the 1890s, and what he decided to do is that he wanted to just drop out. He just had enough of civilization, and he was going to drop out and go to Gunnison Island and start growing a grape vineyard. And at that time, there was something that was called the Homestead Act, and that meant that if you stayed in a place long enough, that place became yours. And so he wanted the entire Gunnison Island. And he was married at the time, and his wife basically said, I think you're crazy. I mean, I'm not going to stop you from doing this, but I'm going to stay right here in Salt Lake City. You go do your thing, and I'll see you later. And so he went out to this island, and he built himself a little shanty and collected dew so that he could drink. I mean, because it's nothing but salt water surrounding this island. And the vineyard really never had much of a chance to survive. And I guess another casualty is of him doing this, other than the vineyard not getting off the ground, was that he displaced white pelicans. And this was like the winter nesting ground for the highest concentration of white pelicans in North America. So he disrupted their nesting habits, which is really not a good thing to do. And so these pelicans, instead of going to Gunnison Island, they wound up going to an island that was a little bit north of Gunnison Island, called Dolphin
Mr.
Island.
Klayman, you will die on Dolphin Island.
Excuse me, I have to get some water.
Of all the things that he talked about, which one left the strongest impression on you?
He once told us about a concept called pre-incarnation.
Don't you mean reincarnation?
No,
Reincarnation.
it was the belief that a person would actually come.
You die, that you will actually go backwards in time or go into the past to get your new identity or your new life. And that would explain, or it does explain, why some people seem like they are a little bit more advanced, intellectually speaking, because they've actually come from the future, and so they've got knowledge of the future, and they've brought that with them in the past. I actually, who I am now as Mr. Klayman, from my future, in my previous life, in my future, I was a fellow by the name of the Specimen. And the Specimen was a guy who, it was his responsibility to warn everybody on the earth of an impending cataclysm that would begin to destroy the world, or will begin to destroy the world, depending how you look at it, in the year 2011. And I believe that when I die, that I will go back into the 1860s as a Civil War performance artist named John Shiloh.
I'm going to do a Civil War performance art where I'm this fight guy that comes in to entertain the troops with skits like this, you know. But I mean, a freak from the Civil War. Civil War performance art, man. No one's been touching those years. There was no art in that decade. It's like,
You don't think I couldn't entertain him? So what did he do when he wasn't teaching?
Let's see. He was inventing a new board game called Stillborn.
Stillborn? That sounds interesting.
It was just a plain white board with pure white playing pieces,
And
Blank white playing cards.
the rules were so sophisticated and erudite that
no one could understand it except for him.
I guess that was the whole gimmick.
he thought it would sell 1 million copies just because it was so impossible to comprehend that
People would think it must be good.
good.
He also liked to come up with ideas
for non-sports
leagues. Like what?
Well, see,
There was the Fruit and Vegetable Juicing League.
You would combine two vegetable or fruit juices, and whichever one had the stronger taste was the winner.
He thought that people would go crazy over
T-shirts and logos.
He came up with
the idea
for a cavity prevention league, an aging league,
a tumor league,
And a cold water immersion
league.
a penile gas siphoning league. And speaking of gasoline, Mr. Klayman was very interested in gas stations. He was developing a new avant-garde play called
boron.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you a rather delicate question.
That's okay.
I thought you might. It just seems so incongruous that Mr. Klayman, seemingly this nice, sensitive man, would be involved in auto-erotic behavior. Was this something that you were aware of?
He felt that people could purify and cleanse themselves through self-shame. If a person could act out aggressive tendencies on themselves, there would be no reason
or advantage to act them out in reality upon others. Self-shame was to him the highest expression of being comfortable with himself. It was almost an art form to him. It made perfect sense to me. You don't believe that he killed himself like the police contend, do you?
Of course not.
That's ridiculous.
They just don't want to pursue it as
It's a murder. It's too uncomfortable
for them. They're afraid of what they might find,
and they don't want to open up that
Pandora's box. There's some things I think
You're better off not.
not knowing, Mr. Wilson. At least not yet.
But I can tell you that in the 2 weeks
Preceding his death, Mr. Klayman was convinced that he was being stalked
by a bloody head.
where I lost 6 pounds in 6 days.
Order now and get the entire Hip Hop Abs system, a $400 value for 3 low payments of just $19.95. Plus, you'll get a free upgrade to express delivery so you can get started even faster. This is an exclusive TV offer, and Hip Hop Abs isn't sold in any store, so call now.
To order Hip Hop Abs, call 1-800-985-6716. That's 1-800-985-6716. Call now.
I was enormous whenever I had